This is Safety Bri, your number one safety geek. Why do we have the behaviors that we do? Superheroes in the workplace, right? All of those things that go into making you an effective safety manager. I love what we do. Motivation, learning, teaching, training, teamwork. I geek out over that just as much as I do safety. Hello, and welcome to the Safety Geek podcast. And today we are talking about the cost of accidents and injuries. Hi, my safety friends. How are you doing? This is Bri, your number one safety geek. I hope that your week is going exactly how you have planned. Can you believe that it is November already? I'm shocked. Like literally last week, it was 88 degrees and then boom, it's November. All right, here come the 70s. I live in Florida. There's no snow here. So 70 is cold to me. But anyway, it just surprises me, you know? I know everyone always talks about it, that how fast things are going and all of that good stuff, you know, and time flies and don't waste your time and all of that. So I'm all for that. I'm all about living in the moment and not putting things off and living with no regrets. But wow, just wow. It has been 10 months of the year have already gone by. We have 2 months left in this decade. And then you sit back and think, like so many people have brought up recently about things that happened in 2000, I guess, because, you know, it's 20 years ago. And I'm just like, wow, you know, I remember that like it was yesterday and everything that's changed in 20 years. And then you even think of like, oh gosh, everything that's changed in the last 10 years. I mean, it's just my safety friends here. I tell you, I'm feeling old. That's all I can tell you. I'm feeling very, very old. And honestly, I don't think I'm that old, but I definitely feel it. So today, what I wanted to talk to you about was the cost of accidents and injuries. And I've written this sentence wrong because I've written costs and I keep fluttering on that one. So I apologize. But anyway, I have my notes in front of me. What I wanted to talk about is that so many times when an accident happens, we look at the cost and we all know, right, that there are costs that are not concrete. Right? They're intangible costs. We like to call them indirect costs. But what I want you guys to get into the habit of doing is really looking at all of the costs and quantifying those costs. Because in previous episodes, I've talked to you about how to sell safety. And how can you sell safety unless you can give an ROI, a return on investment, for what you're wanting to do? And how can you do that unless you understand the actual cost of what you are preventing? So we want to make sure that we're quantifying everything. So, you know, New Year is starting up in 2 months. Maybe this can be an initiative that you put in place. I'd love for you to, over the next couple of months, get all of your ducks in a row, because it will take some time to gather this data. But get your ducks in a row so that way you have numbers that you can use in the future, that you can combine with those direct cost numbers that we're well aware of. So why do you want to have this habit? Well, it's because it does allow your management team to see the big picture. You know, somebody cuts their finger and has to go to the doctor. That's like a $300 medical bill, maybe more depending upon where you live at, right? So they're not seeing it as that big of a deal. But when you combine it with everything else that accident cost the company, it allows that management team to see the big picture. So then it makes it easier for you to sell your initiative. So if you wanted to change the cut gloves that you were using, it allows them to go, oh, well, instead of investing in the $7 glove, we can invest in the $20 glove, and this is the payoff that it's going to have. And so many companies run on such small margins. When you know the exact cost of your accident or injury, depending upon what it is, you can easily tell them, well, it's going to cost you, you're going to have to create, you know, umpteen widgets for free to pay for this cut finger. So when you put it into those terms, it kind of gets people to change their mind. And that's a good point there. That's like a pattern interrupt, right? So thinking about what I was just saying about feeling old and how time is flying by, right? So when I really look at my age and I go, well, no, I'm not really that old. I'm still, 20 years from retirement. And, I still have got all of this time left. My grandmother is still alive, which excellent point. My grandmother is still alive. She's 102, I think. But anyway, you look at it that way and you think you have all this time. But when you actually break it down, and my friends, they kind of laugh at me because they're like, you're so morbid. I look at it as I only have 35 summers left, right? That's a pattern interrupt, because when you say to somebody, you only have 35 summers left, or another way of looking at it is with your children, right? So when you're putting off doing things with your children and you could say, well, I've got all this time, we can do this later. Ideally, most children, maybe my daughter is 15, right? So technically I have 3 summers left with her before she's out of the house and off to college. I have 3 summers. I don't want to waste those. So it kind of changes the way that you think about things. So going back to the cost of accidents and injuries, instead of the dollar value, and you go, well, no, you're going to have to make 2,000 widgets for free to pay for this accident. That's a pattern interrupt. And it allows your managers to really understand the impact that you have on their bottom line. But you cannot do this unless you have the data for how much these accidents and injuries cost. And a lot of people try to use just kind of the data that's out there in the world as like an average cost of this and an average cost of that. But your management team is smart enough, they'll understand that you're just using averages and not using real data. So make sure that you're getting it from your company. All right. So before we get into all the different costs, I want to talk about the 3 categories of costs. So the first one is direct costs. And these are things that you actually get a bill for. So somebody sends you a bill to pay for something that was the result of an accident or an injury. So it could be a medical bill, it could be a repair bill, it could be buying parts to repair something, if you fixed it in-house and you had to run to Lowe's and get some parts, or call Granger or something like that. You have an actual bill that you can attach to that accident or injury. These are the easiest costs to calculate and organize. However, sometimes the bills come into different departments, and you have to make sure that those departments are sharing those bills with you. So there should be like a work order repository where the cost of that work order is all added up in there. And you might need to go to the finance department and be like, hey, when this insurance claims bill comes in, I need to get a copy of it. So that way we know the direct cost of that accident, right? So that's direct cost. Next is indirect cost. All right. And indirect costs are things that we pay for as a part of doing business that you can't necessarily pull out and say, yeah, we're doing this. This cost is something that is related to the accident or the injury. Your job basically is an indirect cost, but your job, not 100% of it is related to one individual accident. So think about things like time and labor, administrative costs. So like you have clerks, that are doing paperwork. Maybe it's use of inventory. So in order to make the repair, you're just using up inventory that you normally just keep in stock anyway. So nobody really tracks what that inventory is getting used for. So it's stuff that you don't necessarily see a bill for, but there is a cost related to the company. So like HR manager's time, your manager's time, the supervisor's time, all of those things. And then lastly, there is emotional cost. And some people may throw the emotional cost into indirect, and you can, but I like to separate it out because this is definitely something that's very, very difficult to put a dollar value on. These are things that are the human factors related to the accident or the injury. So I like to call those emotional costs, and we'll get into some examples of those in a minute. All right, so let's go into detail on all of the different costs related to pretty much every accident or injury. Now, caveat here, I'm sure I'm going to miss some of them. So please go to the show notes for this episode. I believe this is episode 16. So it would be Ask Safety Geek /16. And make sure you leave notes of anything that you feel that I might have missed so we can share it with other people as well. All right. So let's start pretty easy here. Okay. The first is medical costs. So when you have medical costs, you have to look at what's being billed to your insurance company, whether it's hitting your deductible or not. Because when things get billed to your insurance company, that does affect your insurance premiums. All right. So there could also be like drug testing cost involved that doesn't get sent to your insurance company that you pay for directly. Or a return to duty exam. So sometimes after somebody has been into an accident or an injury before, even though they're released from their doctor, some positions require a return to duty exam. And what that basically is you're giving the doctor a job description and saying, hey, are they physically able to do the job? I use return to duty exams a lot with CDL drivers, but then also whenever anybody gets into an accident or is injured outside of work and they're wanting to come back into work, I would do a return to duty because I'm not privy to their medical records. So I really don't know their position. They may have this slip from their doctor to be released to come back, but I don't know if they are actually okay to do the job. So I send them for a return to duty. But you can have that with a workers' comp case too, because especially when it's a severe one, there's so many medical doctors involved. You just kind of want to make sure like, hey, I'm bringing you back into a highly safety sensitive position and you've seen 5 different doctors. I just want to make sure that overall we have one doctor that's kind of compared what you can physically do to doing the job. I don't do this with all of them, but if it is something serious and it's a highly safety sensitive position, then I would do that. Another thing with medical costs could be transportation. That could be reimbursing the employee for driving to and from the medical facility, which is a requirement in some states that you pay that mileage. Or maybe you had to provide them transportation to their doctor's appointments, right? So think about that as well. So that's medical costs. Next is property damage. This is another very easy one to get the cost for. This is damage to your property or damage to other people's property. Now, when it's damage to other people's property, you're going to get a bill. So it's very easy to determine that. When it's damage to your own property, if you're hiring a contractor to fix it, very easy to calculate that number because you're going to get a bill. But if you're fixing it in-house, then you might have to calculate how many hours did our own employees work on it, at what average rate of pay, what parts were involved, what specialized tools did they use, and what were the cost of those tools, and what's the life expectancy of those tools, right? So like if you have a specialized tool, what's the life expectancy of that tool? So most tools are going to last you for several years. But there are things within a tool that, it gets used up. Think of like a grinder or things like that. You could actually go really into the weeds here and say, hey, they use the grinder and on, that's so many dollars worth of grinding material. Who knows, right? All right. So next thing to consider is the cost of returning to business. So when an accident happens, sometimes you have to shut down. Maybe you have to shut down just a portion of your operations. Maybe that vehicle that was in the accident is completely shut down, right? And not being able to use. Maybe there's a big spill that needs to be cleaned up, right? This is all like, let's return back to normal. I like to call it returning to start, right? What do we need to do to return to start? That could be cleaning up. It could be if product fell, it could be picking up product, putting items back where they belong. It could be an environmental cleanup. I'll tell you, I had the strangest environmental cleanup one time where when I was working for the milk company, we had a tanker overturn in front of a McDonald's. And we had to have environmental cleanup for milk because McDonald's did not want the bad smell of the milk, as it seeped into the dirt and all of that. So we had to call an environmental cleanup company in order to do that. It's craziness. So anyway, all of those things are part of let's return to business. Some of these you're going to get a bill for, so it'll be easy to calculate. But some of them you have to go, how many people were involved in the cleanup? How many, what was their average salary? So how much did that actually cost? You might have damage to product. Do I have that listed? I have that listed further on down the line. But, all of those things need to be calculated. What sanitation materials did they use that then got used up and had to be rebought again? Okay. These are all indirect costs that people don't think about that you can add in to, it's going to sound weird, but to inflate the cost of your injury. Because we want to give the management team a true cost of every injury, not just I got a doctor's bill for $300. No, there's all these other costs too. So make sure it's accurate. Even though I said inflate, it's really giving it an accurate number. All right. Next is the direct labor cost. So this is what I mean by direct labor cost is that you can actually look at it going, I had to hire a temp to fill this position until the full-time employee was back to work. That is a direct labor cost. Or it could be, I didn't hire a temp, but I allowed 5 people to have overtime until this employee was back to work. Direct labor costs. So look at that as well. And I'll tell you, the best way to do this is to create a spreadsheet with all of these in a column. So that way you can easily, every row would be the injury or accident. And in every column, you could have what's the direct labor cost? What's the return to business cost? What's the property damage cost? So it's reminding you to think about all of these things. I will try to create that spreadsheet for you. As I'm recording this, I didn't plan on doing that. So I will try to create that for you so that way you can just download it. So go to the show notes and you should be able to download that spreadsheet. All right, next is personnel cost. So this is that indirect cost of all the employees that were involved in the accident that are getting their normal salary or their hourly wage, but you're not really saying, hey, these hours, you're not separating it out. It's not a direct labor cost. It's an indirect labor cost. So think about it. When an accident happens, the supervisor has to stop what they're doing in order to deal with the accident. Witnesses in the area are stopping what they're doing. You have to do an accident investigation. How many hours did you work on that? Is the manager involved with it at all? Do you have an incident review committee that is involved in it? What part does HR play in it? So basically make a list of everybody who's involved when an accident happens. And then I wouldn't do this for every single accident. I would just every quarter or probably every 6 months would be better, is kind of look at this number and create a dollar value for the average number of hours spent for an accident for all of these people. And then come up with an average hourly wage. So that way you can come up with, hey, this is going to be our personnel cost. And we reevaluate this cost every year, every 6 months, every quarter to make sure that it's accurate, right? So what you're looking at is how much time did they take in handling the accident or the injury. You're talking about filling out accident reports, pulling training records, calling doctors, scheduling MRIs, the transportation to the medical facility, filling out forms, filing the claims. And then you also want to think about the first aid, and you can come up with an average number for every type of claim too. So if it's just a first aid incident, our average personnel cost will be XYZ. But if it is a major incident or a severe incident, our personnel cost is going to be ABC, that type of thing. So you can come up with multiple average personnel costs. So I'd probably do at least 2, a minor injury, a major injury, and say, hey, this is what it's averaging us out. Because there's definitely, I'll tell you, I can't do it off the top of my head, but just the hours taken, right? And you figure most HR and safety managers are, they're making what, $40, $50 an hour, it adds up. And then when you have the supervisors in there too, and the managers and all of that good stuff, it really does add up. So, all right, next thing you want to look at is your equipment and your personnel downtime. All right, so how long was the equipment down? How long was the work stoppage? Right? How many people were stopped, as in an account for that accident? And you can come up with like, how much money does this piece of equipment normally make? Right? So if it's being used every day, so if you know that you make so many widgets a day and the margin on those widgets is, 5%, and you can figure out that, hey, we normally make this many widgets a day, but because of the accident, we made this few widgets that day, then you can come up with an equipment and personnel downtime or a productivity loss that you can add in there too. So you can think about those things too. And when you're also thinking about productivity loss, sometimes with productivity loss, you're going to have productivity loss over days or weeks. Because if you think about it, when an injured worker is out of work, right? Let's say that they are on a no work status or they're on a light duty status and they can't return to their normal work. And you have to attempt to replace them or hire a new person to place them. That replacement is not going to be working at the same productivity level as that injured employee who is experienced and may have been there for a while. It's the same thing when you're talking about overtime. So even if you allow another worker to work overtime to cover it up, overtime hours are not as productive as regular duty hours. That's just the way our body works. You get tired, you don't work as productively. So that becomes a productivity loss. So you're going to have a slowdown of production until either the replacement worker gets up to speed or the injured worker is returned and is back up to speed, because they're not necessarily up to speed right away. So these are things that you can actually track to figure out productivity loss. So even though you may have a goal of creating 200 widgets a day and you maintain the 200 widgets a day, you might want to look at, like, is there a quality loss that's going on? Maybe our quality numbers have gone down because of that. And are we able to maintain those numbers? Right? If you are, then that means you weren't working at full production to begin with, but that's a whole nother discussion. All right. Next is supply cost. So you do have some supplies that are generally used following an accident or an injury. You might have cleanup materials. You might have first aid supplies, right? Paperwork that has to be replaced because you already had accident kits made up and now you got to replace it. Bloodborne pathogen kits, spill kits, all those kinds of things. So look at those costs too and add those into there as well. So you can look at every accident or injury and say, hey, did we use a spill kit? Did I have to replace an accident kit? How many forms did I use up? It sounds silly to be thinking about forms you've used up when those are really only like 20 cents a piece when you consider the cost of a copy, but it all adds up, right? So you can come up with like an average paperwork cost of every accident and just reuse that number if you needed to. Because even paperwork, there's time committed in there too, like the time to make it, the time to separate it, to staple it, to put it where it belongs. Sorry, my Echo just kind of beeped at me. All right, so next is product damage. Was any of our widgets destroyed during the accident? And if that was the case, then you want to make sure that you are including that in the cost of your accident. Or maybe it wasn't destroyed where we had to throw it out, but now we have to sell it at a lower cost, right? And if that's the case, then you need to track that cost as well. Also, disposal costs. So I had a truck one time roll over and the operations manager never thought to take the product out of the truck before it got towed off to the salvage yard. And the product would have been salvageable. Not all of it, but a lot of it would have been salvageable. But by the time, because they didn't do it right away, it lost the food quality issue, whatever, with their temperature, and it all had to be disposed of. So even though it wasn't a hazardous product, it was a food product, you still have a disposal cost in that too. Or even like a cleanup cost. If it's a truck or a delivery, I've also had to have cleanup, like the truck was emptied, but because it wasn't clean, then bugs came in. So here it was, 2 weeks later, and we have maggots in the vehicle that need to be cleaned up, even though the truck was, now it's fine to be used, but it had to be cleaned up. So you have all of those things associated with disposal costs to add in to the total cost of that accident or injury. And then you have training costs, right? So a lot of times when we do our accident investigation, one of the corrective actions is retraining. It could be retraining of that individual employee, or it could be retraining of an entire department, or retraining of the management team on how to handle the accident. All of that is time lost that you're actually paying somebody an hourly wage to go through that training. Track it, add it to the cost of your accident. All right, so those are all of the direct and the indirect costs. The next thing I want to talk about is that emotional cost that I mentioned in the beginning. Now, emotional costs are hard to quantify, but they should be tracked in some way, shape, or form. So you can do like a survey that looks at your business trends. So if you actually do like an employee perception survey on a regular basis. I like to do mine quarterly, but you could do these even as frequently as monthly. I've even seen people do, I don't know if you've been through TSA lately, but they have these little like smiley face button machines. How was your experience in TSA today? I've also seen them in restrooms about cleanliness. You can track your employee perception of the business on a daily basis that way too, right? So you can actually track trends on how people are feeling about the business from an employee standpoint. But it's hard to track the business standpoint because that comes down to sales. But things that you need to understand that accidents have an effect on are not just the employees involved, but the other employees. If you didn't handle the accident correctly, that's going to have a negative impact from from the employees that felt that you didn't handle it correctly. Or if you handled it amazingly well and took care of your employee the way you're supposed to, that could have a positive impact. So you can get both on this emotional side. So you have the morale of the staff overall and for how long and what was the effect of it. And the only way to really measure that is if you're doing these perception surveys on a regular basis. Next, you have like the circumstances of the incident itself, such as like a hazard that was never fixed, right? So if people knew that the hazard was there, if people knew that you were purposely not fixing it. So a great example is, where I had that machine where the interlock wasn't working and they reported it to maintenance and nobody fixed it. We had a dramatic drop in morale following that accident because everyone was like, you should have known. We told you that this was broken. But then how we handled the accident increased it afterwards, right? Other emotional impacts are on the customers themselves, right? So if you have a very visible brand and you get into an accident and your customers see this maybe on the news, or they see you, wrecked on the side of the road, or they see that your driver was texting and killed 3 people, all of those things have a negative effect from your customers too. So that could be something that you track. These are going to be hard to track, to quantify, but you should at least track like, hey, this happened and this is some of the consequences that we saw because of it. Another thing I like to think about are the injured employee's family. A lot of people don't like to do this, but I will tell you, when I have an employee that is severely injured, I reach out to the family. And I make sure that they're okay, and I see whether or not they need anything. And that's because when an employee is injured, it has an effect on the entire family. And you as a company, if you're not taking care of that employee, which also involves taking care of their family support system, because if they have a good family support system, they will return to work quicker and they will heal faster. So that's another measurement or another thing that you can consider. And also it could be a cost, right? So for you to check on that family and make sure that they're okay and maybe do a fundraiser for them or whatever it happens to be, that's going to be a cost involved too. And then you might also think about if it is a severe accident, such as a fatality, or maybe you've had like a suicide in your workplace, you're going to have costs involved with like counselors and grievance and maybe flowers to the family and those type of things too. So all of these things need to be tracked. It's not insensitive to track how much you spend on flowers to send to the family for a suicide or for a fatality accident. It gives you the big picture overall, so that way you can say, hey, this is how much this truly cost us. Okay. All right. So that is a pretty extensive list. And you might be thinking like, oh my gosh, I don't want to track all that just for a back strain, but that's fine. If you don't, you're just going to be looking at your $2,000 or $3,000 bill. And you might actually see out on the internet when you do a search for what's the average cost of a back strain, generally the number you see is $50,000. But so if you tell your management team that and say, well, the average cost of a back strain is $50,000, and they turn to you and say, our last 5 were only $3,000. Where are you getting that number from? You can actually give them your own data. So that's why you want to track this stuff. So you can combine some of it to make it easier to use the same numbers over and over again, especially for like personnel costs and some of those indirects. But it is definitely worth your time to go this deep, so that way you can actually dive into, what your company margin is and tell them exactly how many widgets that accident cost them. Remember, pattern interrupt. Don't just give them dollars. Give them things that really matter to them. I had a business one time where their big number was cases per day or cases per hour or something like that. And it was like, oh, well, you're going to have to pull, because it was a warehousing, you're going to have to pull 1,000 cases for free. You're not making any profit on those 1,000 cases. Because this person cut their finger or whatever it happens to be. So that's where it gives you that justification. All right. Anyway, that is all that I have for you. Remember, check the show notes. I will create a download. I'll do it right now with just a simple spreadsheet with all of these things. So that way you can easily track it and you can put numbers at the end. And that way, you don't have to create it yourself. So I'll do that for you. It'll literally just take me a few minutes. So get that in the show notes, and that will also get you on my email list. So when I send you the download, you'll automatically be on my email list. And I will tell you, I've been sharing documents every single week on my email list now. As I'm cleaning up my document library, anything I see that's valuable, I'm sharing it with the network. I can't really do it on the blog because it's just too much work. But anyway, a simple one like this shouldn't be too bad. I will chat with you guys next week. So in the meantime, you have a safe week. And remember, 2 months left in the year. Make them count. You guys have a great day. Bye. Check out the show notes and links for this week's show at www.asksafetygeek.com. Hey, did you know that there's an Ask Safety Geek Facebook group? You can find it on the Safety Geek page at facebook.com/Ask Safety Geek. Be sure to join the group where we share safety manager stories and best tips and tricks within the community. Thanks for listening and have a safe day. Talk to you soon.